Welcome back to Kweebec Corner. My name is Connor, and yesterday Hytale shook the community to its core by giving us over 16 minutes of unfiltered, raw gameplay footage, which we're going to break down here in all of its glorious detail so we know exactly what to expect going into this early access. From the combat and weapon types to the world and lore that we finally get to see, living and breathing in this early access version of the game. We're going scene by scene, analysing mechanics, Easter eggs, and teasers that you might have missed. Okay, so with the over 16-minute video, fittingly titled Breaking the Curse, we start with the player fighting against skeletons in Zone 1. That's the green and luscious area of Orbis, the world Hytale is set around. Orbis is divided into zones which are like groups of similar biome types. Zone 2, 3, and 4 we see later in the footage. This clip is a great first peek at early access combat. If you look to the hotbar, we can see the player is using iron daggers. They come together as a pair, you don't need to equip one in both hands to use them. The base attack here, just a click, performs a quick slash or stab and seems to only have a short cooldown, about 0.3 seconds, so you can perform these attacks in quick succession. You can also hold click, it seems, for a charged attack. For the daggers, it's a kind of launching double strike, which you'll notice drains more stamina. That's this yellow bar on the bottom here, the first time we're really seeing it in action. There's been graphics showcased in the past, and we've even seen it appear static, but throughout this clip you can see just how reactive and important stamina has become to combat. While attacking, you can see the player is also charging up a special attack. The blue ring is slowly filling up around the icon here in the bottom left, and the daggers themselves are increasingly glowing blue. Important to note here that the ring only increases if you land a successful hit, so you can't charge it by hitting thin air, and you'll also see that the skeleton mob here blocks a few hits, and with these times the ring also doesn't increase. The daggers here don't appear to be able to block, but that's by nature as they clearly are designed for higher damage per second. When the special finally does charge, we hear a powerful noise to let us know, and pressing Q triggers that special, which with the daggers is 3 slashes forward, causing increased damage and even destroys some blocks here, it seems. We'll see from this footage that all the weapon types in Hytale have different charge attacks and special attacks, which we can very likely combine with mobility like dashing and sliding and even mantling to create very dynamic combat interactions. Even here, the dagger charge attack is being used to escape or create ground between the player and the mob. Continuing the clip, you'll notice that the mob behaviors aren't perfect. They do seem to back up to brace the player, they block multiple times and sidestep to try and dodge attacks. They even give chase and we see some pathfinding. However, this is all a work in progress and I'm sure they'll be miles better after a couple of updates. The items the player picks up are displayed in the bottom right. We then also see some sword and shield gameplay as he switches from the daggers. The player is a bit more cautious on the approach here. He uses a charged attack first, which we see as a big swing, followed by a quicker regular swing, which doesn't seem to drain the stamina at all, which means pacing your charged attack becomes even more strategic in combat scenarios within Hytale. The shield is used for blocking, but then also used to bash at the skeleton, using up a good chunk of stamina, especially as it seems you can spam it with little to no cooldown, so it kind of acts as a pseudo weapon as well. Some interesting notes here, we can see that enemies can be hit upwards multiple blocks with knockback, at least by using the shield. Weapons also don't seem to currently have any durability, although this may just not be implemented yet. Thinking about it, it could actually be an interesting choice if only tools had durability, especially if there's a lot of fighting mobs in the game. Throughout this clip, you'll notice the player's attacks randomly cause the blocks to break. This is during all different types of attacks, so it could be a bug or it may just be an interesting mechanic to vary the terrain as you fight. In the last few frames of this first clip, we also catch a house or a structure of some kind in the distance, which I thought was just interesting to point out. The next clip we get, set in the Zone 1 plains, shows that players are capable of a 3-block jump and can mantle to reach 4 blocks high in a single jump. We've known this for a while, but it's great to see that this is still in the game. The player looks around, giving us a nice look at world gen in this version. There's lots of foliage, rock croppings, a bit of a lack of mobs, but there is also a distant ruined tower, which we've seen in screenshots before. There's even this weird glitched mountain, which I thought could be a ziggurat from this Zone 2 concept art, or at least that was before I checked the 4K footage to see that they were stairs. This is actually a prefab gateway of sorts with towers up at the top there. Simon did acknowledge that they know it appears a little flat right now, but they're working to improve World Gen V2 every day. As the player jumps off the rock, parkour fans are going to love that you can roll and slide, speeding up your own momentum in the process. This has quite a lot of huge implications for mobility, PvP, and even general PvE, to be honest. Imagine using this to slide through a 1-block hole or gap. You may even be able to continue shooting your bow or swinging your weapon as you slide, although we do not see that in this footage. The player also started this clip with a crossbow, which we see has 6 bolts, and switches to a short bow shortly afterwards. I think it's interesting to point out that with crossbows, mostly I get get annoyed that it's just one shoot and then you have to reload, so having 6 bolts ready to go is pretty useful. Then, as the player runs, a small detail, but we also see that sprinting drains your stamina. I'm not sure how much this would impact overall gameplay, maybe heavier armor will cause the stamina to drain even more, but hopefully it isn't too invasive. It drains slowly at the moment it seems, which should be manageable, but we still do see Simon get into some scrapes later on because of this when trying to escape some mobs. The third clip we get shows the player's tree chopping and gathering experience in Zone 1, an axe is used and durability is drained. Subtle, but you can also notice the swinging of the axe seems to speed up as he chops. The major thing here, of course, though, being the big reveal of what happens to trees when we hit them. Ironically, for context, after 7 years since the trailer for this game, we've never seen a tree be chopped down. We've only ever heard that you can't punch it like you can in Minecraft as a way to subvert player expectations from the get-go. That's why the tree also doesn't stay floating here. It collapses all at once with a sweet leaf falling animation to accompany it as it drops the blocks and other resources like sap and sticks from the branches on the ground. I personally think this looks great and really satisfying, to be honest, but also curious that there's no saplings that seem to fall, reminding us that there is another source of tree regrowth in this world, the Kweebecs, who may also help us with our replanting efforts. The timber effect of course avoids survival worlds having weird floating trees and leaves all around spawn, but also mimics many popular timber mods from early Minecraft, just making resource gathering quicker and generally more convenient for the player. We see later that for trees that are multiple blocks thick, you do need to fully sever the trunk of the tree by all of its blocks in order to chop it down. The player then gathers some flowers and wards off an enemy skeleton that is patrolling in the sunlight, indicating some mobs may not burn or despawn at daytime, still posing varying levels of threats towards the player. Here he uses a short bow, starting with 100 arrows, which is likely the maximum stack amount for arrows specifically. They charge a shot which doesn't seem to use any stamina, and then lands a headshot on the skeleton. Seemingly, this headshot fills the entire special ability meter in one. We then get the special ability reveal for the bow, which is a sick looking triple shot, which you'd think would drain 3 arrows, but actually it doesn't take any from the stack, which I think is either some sort of perk to the ability itself, or just a bug. As Simon said, this particular attack was only integrated recently. The player then picks up some piles of sticks from the floor by pressing F, each pile you'll notice containing a different number, which is a nice touch. Simon also addressed the axe cutting speed for trees, considering this is an iron axe, clarifying that they still need to work on the exact timings and the tiers for all the tools. As we see later, there's a plethora of tiers or material of tool, but they're not all exactly worked out right now. A small Easter egg here in case you missed it, you can actually see a duck flying away from this first tree that gets chopped down. I spotted this because I was looking for Kweebecs up there. Another thing here, which we see more of later, is the player slightly crouching or sneaking when he spots the enemy. A stealth mechanic is definitely going to be interesting to play around with, trying not to make sound around dangerous enemies or patrols of scouting mobs. Next, we see a player raiding a Zone 3 Outlander settlement. The Outlanders are the only faction we currently know about that inhabit the snow zone of Borea. They're a cursed human faction that have become infected by the void magic, specifically the void waters that are spreading into this zone. The player runs through, alerting a number of them. We see 2 distinct symbols over their heads, a yellow exclamation mark for when the mobs are aggravated, as well as a green question mark for when they are confused. The player handles a cobalt battle axe here, which can also block but takes longer to swing and likely causes more damage per hit than swords. As he aggroes more mobs, a chain reaction starts and they circle him, a perfect time then to unleash the battle axe's special ability, which is a spinning area of effect swing that you seem to be able to control the direction of. If you listen closely here actually, you'll notice the battle axe also hits the log blocks behind the player, confirming that yes, actually weapons do seem to affect the environment intentionally by design. The player switches to a crossbow to help deal with the crowd. Notice that currently the ultimate meter doesn't seem to fill with a successful hit, but does manage to get some charge with the last shot somehow, suggesting this may be a work in progress. Outlanders here drop an item called Shadow Weave Scraps. Noticeably, we don't see many more of the Outlanders like the Dark Shaman Priests or the Colossus, but some skeletons do join in the fight, right as we see the battle axe's charge attack, which is like like a swooping smash. The player actually combines this with a jump midway through, potentially adding extra impact or damage to the hit. They continue fighting before fleeing around the back of the settlement and investigating a room where he smashes a pot and then goes out to sit on a chair. Just quickly here showing furniture functionality in the game, which looks especially great in third person. You likely may have missed this, but zooming into the snowy horizon, we also see two mystery mobs wandering into the forest one after another. I tried to zoom in and figure out what these were, two skeleton warriors or potentially another faction that may live in Zone 3. Remember, Zone 1 has the Kweebecs and the Trorks, Zone 2 has the Scarrocks and the Ferens, but Zone 3, at the start of this clip you'll remember I said only has the Outlanders, which isn't entirely true. A faction called the Fauns were actually referred to in a concept art years ago and seemed like a very strong possibility, especially with their one with nature shaman vibe that contrasted very well against the darker death magic humans. In fact, when speaking about mobs on X the other day, Simon was asked about the Fauns specifically, and so he had a look around and found one in the files. He then decided to send me the clip to reveal exclusively here on this channel, so I invite you to take a quick glance at our very first, very slight glimpse of a Faun. Set in a rather bleak looking zone, most likely to disguise the mob a bit, it stands looking relatively similar to the concept art, holding a rather intimidating spear and looking ready to fight. It's amazing to know they've even attempted this mob considering how little development they appeared to have. It could just be that the model and texture exist, we can also notice a clear idle animation, but that may be all that's done so far. If further fleshed out before early access, Fauns will likely control wolves similar to the Outlanders and possess magical abilities that may also utilize the good nature of the water in this zone, not the void parts. We also see some bats flying above the trees here, which we get way better shots of in the later footage. Some small comments on the Outlander clip. I do love how the third and first person switch so fluidly. You can get a much better grasp of your situation from third person too, it seems, meaning it can help you keep alert and get you out of close calls. The player doesn't take much damage during combat in this clip, but Simon does remind us that all of this is still being worked on and balanced. When the player jumps off the roof, you'll also notice they take no fall damage, which happens several times in this footage. The animation before the roll that they do appears to be something that you can trigger yourself, perhaps by sneaking as you land. It should therefore be quite interesting to traverse this world, effectively cushioning your falls like a bucket clutch but with more style. And this is without any mounts or vehicles, by the way, which we've seen they do intend to add to the game, like a hot air balloon or even a ram. In the next clip, the player is back to fighting skeletons, this time with a mace similar to the battle axe with slower swings. It seems that based on the arrow of this hit marker that swings are actually going to be directionally based, which means the angle of which you hit at an enemy could be important, maybe for reducing or breaking their block. So regular crosshair is this dot, but when held down during attacks, we see this directional arrow instead. We also see the hilt of the mace used to bash at the mobs. We've actually seen this in previous combat footage, as have we the special move from the mace, which is a large jump and slam down onto the ground, causing damage and knockback to enemies. The player picks up an item called quartzite rubble here, and then switches to the battle axe before getting a little overwhelmed by archers and spellcasters. These are two more variants of skeleton mob. We've actually seen the spellcaster type before as well. We as players can loot these books from them and use them ourselves to cast fireball spells. You'll notice the red vignette displaying how in danger we are when it comes to health. The player then here retreats in order to heal by eating an apple from their inventory. Notice no hunger bar. So by eating the apple, the player gains a temporary healing buff and regains health over time. We've seen in previous footage that food can instantly boost health, but it seems that this is a system that underwent a few changes. I'm also not a big fan of the healing icon, but this is very easily changeable. We actually do see the players use the daggers to block here as well. You'll notice the little shield icon pops up when they brace themselves. So I guess whilst still being a DPS weapon, every weapon other than the long range will be able to block. When the player returns to attacking the skeletons, the behavioral glitches do become more noticeable. I can't lie. This one skeleton is not really being able to figure out its position, for example. The mob pathfinding and logic clearly needs a lot of work, that's no secret. Simon has admitted this outright. Let's go back to the major part of this clip though. We see the updated player inventory. There's a slot for a helmet, chest piece, hands, and legs. The bottom slot shows your offhand or quick access slot, which can be opened by pressing Z. Throughout all of the footage, we actually see the player utilize this multiple times in order to pull out the shield, even fast swapping from other weapons. You can have up to 4 quick access items in your offhand, so that can include a torch and a shield if you want, and the option to go barehand if needed. We have an uneven health number suggesting buffs with armor or spells, or even permanent health increases that might be possible, as well as mana, which Simon confirms they haven't touched on much yet. The magic systems are still being developed and everything considered, so this is something we will see fleshed out more as we move through early access. We see this pocket crafting section above the inventory, showing that you can combine all sorts of rubble like rocks or even those quartzites we found earlier. This is without a grid-based crafting system, you just need them in your inventory to make items like a campfire, much more akin to games like Valheim or Terraria than Minecraft. What's great here is you also have the ability to bulk craft a stack of 10 or as many as you can afford to craft, which is a great efficiency, I'm not gonna lie. To the right of the player is also 3 very interesting slots, each with arrows going to the right, which I think directs us to this window here, the pocket crafting window. So obviously you have the pocket crafting section, that's this hammer, then the backpack, which I can only imagine allows you to access your extra storage and maybe even special functionality that is unique to each backpack. For example, we may have caught a glimpse at some backpack workstations, meaning you could specialize your gear with what you're able to craft, like a cooking station for food or an alchemy bag for creating potions. The third icon, the hardest thing to guess at in my opinion, has a symbol resembling Gaia's logo. She's the god of Hytale's world, so maybe this is some kind of holy buff or special trinket slot for enchanted rings and other accessories. In the inventory itself, we see branches with a stack size of 250, whilst logs and other blocks seem to only max out at 50, and again arrows at 100. There's stones, droppings, tree sap, mostly just generic items that we've come to expect, although there is this book with a love heart on it, possibly a tome of healing, but we know nothing about it yet. With these stack sizes, the character is carrying over 500 sticks alone in his inventory, and that's without any backpacks, so it is likely that item weight is not a thing. You won't be over encumbered like in other RPG games. We see there's also options for searching recipes, suggesting we'll have to find those ourselves still, as well as a number of icons here for auto sorting options for quality of life. In the next clip, we at long last get to see the Scarrocks in action. These are a bug-based faction from Zone 2 and the darker faction of this area. They are opposed to the fox-like creatures known as the Ferens, which we see one of later. Scarrocks actually have these glowing blue tips that they use to communicate with one another, almost like wireless connection, potentially using the wind magic to echolocate or alert their comrades. Long story short, each zone has an element attached to it, Zone 1 Earth, Zone 2 Wind, Zone 3 Water, etc., and we believe that the element for that particular zone is the source of all the magic for said area. You can see that when a player hits a Scarrock that their antenna glows slightly red, probably alerting others nearby. The Scarrocks got a whole revamp a few years back, adding a number of new brutish variants and a more alien-like design which the community was divided over. We're still unsure how much of that new content will end up back in the game at this point. Continuing this clip, we see Simon starts with the sword's ultimate or special move, which is a quick spin and then a forward lurch which hits the Scarrock dead on. The player picks up some medium hide here as well as some raw wild meat. Lovely to know that we can chow down on some Scarrock drumsticks over the campfire. Obviously, we have seen these Scarrock nests before, but never so riddled with mobs. This clip actually shows how dangerous it could get when overtaken by these things in an enclosed space, especially with all the smaller Scarrocks that are providing backup here. These are the tunnels where they lay their eggs, a sound that the Hytale team specifically wanted me to hear after I asked about them in a blog post one time. We see the triple shot from the bow again as the player picks up an orange glowing mushroom. We actually saw some violet glowing mushrooms earlier, so there's probably an array of colors for these. Again, here we see the player use the dagger's charged attack to escape the sticky situation, which his draining stamina was not going to be able to deal with. He seems to be running back now to a little cave base that he has set up, which you can see ahead here. Now we go into a much scarier clip, the player venturing through the snowy wastes and looking back to see some kind of skeletal guard patrol, each wielding torches. We know there will be environmental variants of skeletons. These ones look like they just got done chasing our player, who then enters a mysterious looking forest biome with dead trees and very low visibility. If you look really closely here too, for just a second, we see a structure lit up in the trees, very likely to be a Kweebec settlement and our first time seeing them in quite a while. While Kweebecs do stick around Zone 1, there has been past evidence to suggest that the team imagined them in various areas and conditions. There's been so many fan arts over the years of different Kweebec variants that honestly I think it's one of the most likely things to be added in the game at the start. If not by the team, then by the fans themselves. Within this suffocating ghost forest, the player clearly spots something in the distance across the way, and if we zoom in, we actually see some strange sprawling crawling creature. I think I described it in my reaction as witchy, and I can just see the Pokemon comparisons coming in now, but I think we need to consider this for a moment. The player does not want to go near that thing. Getting closer after they mantle across a gap, another sign that parkour will be fun in this game, we see that the creature is holding a very large axe of some kind. It has spiky ears too that almost seem familiar, like we've seen them before. Many thought this was a completely new mob, but we actually have caught a glimpse of it years ago in a Halloween postcard. Right in the very background, we see it here. Earlier in this clip as well, the mob also seems to be showing a glowing symbol of sorts on its chest, perhaps alluding to the more evil nature of this thing. The only other chest-like gem that we've seen in the game is with the Outlanders, who, also happen to appear in Zone 3 and replace their hearts with void magic in some weird kind of ritual. Many in the community now believe that this could be a kind of corrupted goblin or Kweebec, the Outlanders actually using dark magic to mess with more than just their own people. We're definitely going to need to keep an eye out for this thing. I'm almost certain that it will play a key role in some way. The clip also highlights stealth again, as the player's footsteps do get quieter on the ground as they approach. Clearly mobs can detect based on sight, but also sound, it seems. So lower level players that encounter more dangerous creatures can attempt to avoid them, they won't just get killed on the spot. I mean, imagine trying to use these mechanics to infiltrate that Outlander camp from earlier, benefiting those who like to move quickly in and out, a few dagger backstabs, but no serious chaos. I just have to say the Firefly ambience in this zone is spot on too. The player uses some thinner branches to parkour over then, showing no issues with hitboxes or anything like that when attempting this. And then they are jump scared by a creature that appears to be crouching or hiding initially before making a sound and catching Simon's attention. He tries to flee, but also instinctively places down a healing totem for protection, showcasing some of the PvE and PvP meta they hope to reach in this game. Simon again did specify that magic is limited, but wands, totems, staffs, and spellbooks will all be available. Going back to this big brutish meathead for a second, by the way, it's called a Varan spawn, and we know very little about them besides that they do Varan's bidding. Varan being the antagonist that isn't often mentioned of Hytale and the direct opposition to Gaia. In fact, Varan is the reason we have all these other mobs that come next, the flying void eyes and the half-decomposed crawlers which emerge from the ground to ambush the player. It also seems they have a mechanic to call over more of its friends once it's caught you. They do seem to spawn more frequently at night as well. It's rare if we ever see them in the daytime. The player uses the bow to quickly stun the void eye down to the ground. We have no idea if this is an intentional mechanic or not. The void eye kind of freaks out for a bit before trying to shoot a purple void ball, which I imagine would cause the player more of a threat when the mob behavior has been perfected. Right now it just seems to have got stunned and dropped to the ground, where it becomes a bit of a meat shield. Overall in this clip though, as far as combat, the weapon switching just seems so fluid. Although important to note that your ultimate or special meter does reset when you switch weapons, it makes combat look so much more dynamic. Plus, despite the player not taking much damage, we know this will all be balanced eventually. After this, the player then retreats into an ice cave, really the cave system I feel that we've seen the most of at this point. The player does take some damage here, perhaps they could have used rolling to help out. We actually see the player in an earlier clip attempt to reduce fall damage by crouching as they land. Here we also spot that the water can be used to cushion the fall. Venturing into this cave, which we've actually seen before in this OG clip, we get the expected feeling. It's claustrophobic, but has a strong ambience and atmosphere. You can even spot ores giving off a white glint in the walls. The player then breaks another container for some health pots. This is a classic RPG staple, which we saw earlier in the game, and I'm very happy to be able to mess around with once I'm playing. This is all before descending deeper into a bat-filled cavern. No enemies seem to be spawning here yet, but the bats do make everything feel more reactive, especially as they become spooked by player movement. Again, the way the ore shines here makes it very obvious that it is there. Almost too much, some would say. We know next to nothing about the abundance of resources on Orbis, and that'll likely stay the same until the team really figures out how to fine-tune everything in the world generation. Another small point to bring up is that the players hadn't used a torch even once here. The whole journey through the cave is light enough for the pathway ahead to at least remain visible. Not sure if that's more because it's an ice cave and the lighting is just more forgiving, but it's nice to know that we won't have to craft 2 stacks of torches every time we go mining. Next, we visit a swampy biome with a very thick mist. Overall, there have been some complaints about how dark this footage is, so hopefully the team can do a bit to optimize or add options for brightness. Starting by a lake, at first we can see a void eye flying above the water. The player then wanders a little, just giving us a bit of time to take in the ecology and environment in general. They then craft a torch to help see, equipping it to the offhand wheel. While doing this, we then glimpse another special book in the inventory, but this time with plant fiber on the cover, possibly then suggesting a crafting recipe book, or maybe a way to learn more about farming in general, the same way that the art book may help with potion recipes or learning to heal. The player spots a glowing mob in the distance and sneaks around a tree towards it. Despite this, the mob does seem to spot Simon instantly, and this one we've certainly never seen before. Kind of a glowing, ghostly thing, potentially a mob called the Wraith, which we see teased in a later clip. It has giant horns, a helmet-like head, giant ice claws, and some massive dentures. You can even see chains dangling off it as if it appears to have broken free. It almost feels reminiscent of an Outlander, but feels more supernatural. The player wastes no time trying to escape here, almost running into another crawler and then showcasing the biome transitions they currently have in the game as he goes. The player crosses over to Zone 2 and alerts a weird grub mob with green eyes, which many in the community also thought was new. We've actually seen this in a very old screenshot and even in the old combat footage with the Trog. In the background, you can actually see it over here rummaging around the forest. It's nice to see the mystery mob finally getting a bit more context. There's also another glowing wraith type mob over there in the distance. Lots and lots of Zone 2 points of interest here as we continue the clip. We have some mining camps, possibly a Ferran village in the background, as well as some human ruins which have been overtaken by the dead. As the sun starts to rise, you can again see lots of void eyes. We have a little camp here, which I believe we may have seen before, and a mysterious red glowing gem out in the distant rocks. There's lots of crawlers in the distance with their beady green eyes, some more structures, and even this well-lit tower. The player attacks a few more skeleton variants then before looking out over the world, giving us a better glimpse at the ocean, then what I believe is a Ferran village, and then after that a giant boneyard, which the player jumps down into to avoid the magical wielding mobs behind him. Notice again here the rolling does block the fall damage. We get our first look at the game map itself, opening to show a large portion of Zone 2. We see the boneyard, a number of ruined human structures, potentially some Ferran settlements, as well as Scarix ziggurats, which I did mention earlier. You can also notice the ocean drops off pretty quickly here, with not much appearing to exist in that biome. We see the transitions between Zone 1 and Zone 2 much better here, as well as how the terrain varies in general, this section in particular being quite uneven and rocky. You'll even notice some smaller carved out oasis areas for those who finally stumble across a glimpse of life. This video then puts us in a bit of a Halloween style forest with different ambient glowing plants of orange, purple, and green. We see this random waggling tail, which I was confused about for a while, but then the community pointed out is actually from a rat. Here we see even more minimap, a lot of rocky terrain clearly in this area, with some ghostly forests, swamps, and peninsulas to explore on the coast. The player fights another skeleton and climbs over a ruined house. Across the way, we see another structure of some kind, although it is hard to make out, possibly a well or mine shaft, as we know these generate naturally. The player then brings up the chat where we see him enter a command to change the time of day, but also that you can use this to change from adventure mode to creative, and even to set your graphics mode, which Simon has set to trailer apparently. The stark lighting change really does showcase the different vibes that a biome can have depending on the time of day. I also love these trees specifically that appear to grow up slightly from the ground, leaving a little nook underneath for mushrooms and vines to grow. We saw in one image that was a cross section of the world generation that trees seem to root deep into the underground, making the whole world generation feel more interlocked and purposeful. Simon sets a location on his map as a waypoint, which then displays on the compass at the top of the screen. Right at the end here, we also see a giant bullfrog, which we've caught only once before in a screenshot. Nice to see that it survived. Apparently these are called BAMs, as correctly pointed out by creator Mine, who also did a breakdown on this footage. We then enter Zone 4. This is a luscious underground biome filled with bioluminescent plants and creatures of all kinds. It exists below a fiery wasteland that has been devastated by an unknown event. Either way, the animals have now had to evolve to survive down here. That includes cave raptors and rexes, along with the native faction of sloth people called the Slothians. That's right, there's a whole faction based on sloths. That's exactly what Simon is in his avatar. We did see these for a few short seconds in the original trailer, but for the first time we now get to see their actual structures and environment. The Hytale account also released our very first close-up image of a Slothian, who you can see here is adorned in a traditionally inspired set of armor crafted from bamboo and other materials. Honestly, this gives me massive Pandaren vibes from World of Warcraft, an MMO the team were directly inspired by. The Pandarans are like if an entire faction was Po from Kung Fu Panda, seemingly slow, dim-witted, and cuddly, but in reality are dangerously tough martial arts experts. It does seem that despite some Slothians appearing as humble fisher folk, they pack more of a punch than they're really letting on. Especially considering, you know, the training ground that they have and that they share an ecosystem with living, breathing, brutal dinosaurs. The Slothian style is a bit Aztec mixed with some Japanese inspirations, and I for one can't wait to learn more about them, including including any of their potential rivals that may exist down here. Some subtle stuff in this clip, you can notice the reflections of the water. The player does do a 2-block jump multiple times, and although they didn't see any dinosaurs, we did get a clip a few days later showing exactly that. The glowing cave raptors that seem to hunt in packs. Now, in what appears to be a Zone 4 biome, but on the surface where everything is actually still destroyed, a player approaches another ruined structure. As he does, you'll notice the rat here, that's the one we thought we saw a tail of earlier, a red ore of some kind, as well as a bat. There is also a small blue thing over there, but I have no idea what this is exactly. Another small detail, but very atmospheric when the player approaches, is the way that the sun and haze gets blocked out by the rocks here, allowing for a much better visibility of the enemy. Upon entering the courtyard, we see a number of skeleton variants, a bit more deadly than before. We also see an Emberwolf, a giant molten rock-like dog that seems pretty tough to beat and relatively quick. We actually saw this in the trailer and a few other very small shots back in the day. Maybe the key here is just to dump a bucket of water on them, who knows. As the player seems to backstab some of the creatures, notice that the crosshair does change to red, either to indicate that the next hit will be a killing blow, or that it will be a critical strike as you're aiming for a weaker point. Also, if you listen to the audio of this clip specifically, these skeletons do appear to say something. This is the first vocal we've ever really heard within Hytale, and I'd love it if people could try and figure out what exactly is being said. Hopefully it is English. In a first for Zone 4, we also see these tiny, luscious patches cropping out here and there. These are likely signs of what is inhabiting the cave systems below. What this means is the world of Orbis is very much starting to reclaim Zone 4 from the destruction that it faced. Another subtle part of the world building pointed out by the environment itself. Moving on then, we actually can see some volcanoes here in the very, very far distance, kind of like Mount Doom, which will be great to see and explore one day. Additionally, as they wander through this ghost forest, the player now comes into contact with one of my favorite mobs from this clip. This is a skeleton hunter. We can see based on the special outfit and weapon, this mob actually holds a blunderbuss. This confirms artillery and gunpowder fueled weapons do actually exist in Hytale's adventure mode, opening the door to even more steampunk style technology. We've seen a helicopter backpack, and Simon has even confirmed gliders, so there's likely a lot more to learn about. The hunter, like in many games, controls a pet. Here it's an undead dog or ghost hound, which we have seen in a few screenshots before, but now we actually see it wandering around a little distance away from the skeleton hunter. Unfortunately, we don't get to see the mob use much of the weapon, and the dog doesn't seem to aggro on the player either, but again, this will all be fixed up come early access in a few weeks. The final clip shows off some modding tools, but also gives us some really great perspective on the world itself. Notice that the player here doesn't have the hammer icon on the right of the profile anymore, as we are in creative mode. Not much has changed with the inventory items themselves, but we do see the player is now holding 2 mysterious shards that we'll talk about in a minute. The creative menu itself is host to a bunch of items we see. At least 10 pickaxe variants is crazy, by the way. We have wood, stone, iron, copper, cobalt, thorium, and a few more that we haven't heard about yet. There's a watering can, some hoe, axe, and spade variants, a sickle, and then some even stranger items. Specifically here we see 4 red items, indicating that they are developer items added only for creative use or for modding. One is clearly a guitar, whilst the others remain quite vague and hard to figure out. Maybe you can do some work on that in the comments. We also, bizarrely enough, see scissors, which I'm really not sure what the purpose is, maybe to change your character's hair in game, as well as these 2, which the community seem to believe are backpack variants, each with different types of workbench integrated into them. This one looks a lot more like it would be based on regular crafting, and the other seems like a bit heavier and more for forging armor and metal weapons. Again, I think it's really cool that you might be able to specialize exactly what your character can do based on what you equip. We skip through a bunch of creative mode blocks here, which I'll pause on for a second for you to see. I'm not going to go through every one here as we have no names, but it is good to see that the many decoration items from the past are returning, such as the Kweebec plushie, custom jack-o'-lanterns, a number of water containers, like a seriously large amount, ink and quill, potion bottles, we've got a scarecrow, a starfish, and much, much more. We get a flash of the map then, showing 2 Trot camps on the borders of Zone 1 and Zone 2, which we then fly over in the clip afterward. It's actually great to finally get a full shot over the camp. You'll notice we hear a drum beat kick in when the player flies around the settlement. This is likely iconic to their faction, a kind of tribal war march. Other than that though, and the guarding positions that the Trorcs seem to take up, not much behavior is displayed here to talk about. Back to the modding tools real quick, the player scrolls through a huge list of mobs to spawn in here, each appearing in front of the player as they select them. It would be great to go through every mob on this list, but Simon said that despite the scroll wheel indicating that there are close to 600 or even 700 mobs in the game, only about 100 or so actually have full behaviors. The rest are just there to play around with for now. He settles on a Farron Longtooth, Longtooth either being the name of this type of Farron or an NPC name specifically for this particular Farron who may be important to the story in some way. This is our first full footage of an armored Farron Shaman. Again, as a reminder, these are the second faction in Zone 2, the ones that fight against the buggy Scarrocks from earlier. This now leaves us having seen every faction in the game throughout this footage that we are currently aware of, even if the glimpse of the Kweebecs was only very small. When the player flies over the forest, we also hear a woodpecker sound for a moment. As the player then speeds up, we see another skeleton ruin with a Trorc investigating below us, as well as another skeleton patrol in the far distance. We then see the player tearing through Outlanders with an AK. We saw a meme of a Kweebec using one of these years ago, but by the red highlight on the item, it is clear that this is a developer item, modded in and not to be expected in adventure mode. The player then wanders through the blue or azure forest as we get another glimpse of the ocean, and then they place down something called an ancient gateway, which they then use a gem to activate a portal with. The gem, you'll notice, is called an Orbis fragment, specifically tied to a place called Bleak Root Bog. Some people in my community believe that may point to this area, which is in the concept art and based around portal dungeons. What's significant here is that this gem has a time limit of 10 minutes, so either the portal will stay active for 10 minutes or wherever this takes you will only last 10 minutes, suggesting more of, again, a dungeon or new world type of experience in my opinion. The portal summoning animation itself looks absolutely amazing, and I do wonder if we can manipulate these ourselves to be able to teleport around our own world and perhaps even visit other worlds, as all single player Hytale worlds will technically be servers. Servers which we can open up to any players at any time. I'm sure that there is still a lot of things I missed in this clip. I'm only one man, I can only go through so many things, but please let me know in the comments your opinions and if you caught anything else. Make sure to subscribe to get all the Hytale updates that are going to be coming in the next couple of weeks. Check the Discord as we're currently running a $100 art competition. Check the video on screen for even more Hytale content. Stay safe and keep free.